Welcome back to the LoJo Show. I'm Sofi Godfrey, your host, and thank you for joining us. If you've been following along, we've been talking about modernization and how organizations can move forward without sacrificing security or performance. Today, we're shifting our focus to the federal defense space, where modernization is no longer just a long-term goal. It's an operational requirement. Across the Department of Defense, organizations are being pushed to adopt zero trust, replacing aging infrastructure, and keeping pace with evolving cybersecurity requirements. But here's the challenge. The mission doesn't stop just because your technology needs to be upgraded. So the question for today's conversation is, how do you modernize critical defense systems without interrupting the mission? Joining me today are Carlos Rodriguez, Ryder Henderson, Logan Brown, and Clint Fisher. Carlos is a principal security engineer with more than 18 years of cybersecurity experience, specializing in security assessments, incident response, penetration testing, and industrial control system security, helping organizations strengthen their overall security posture. Ryder is a senior infrastructure engineer with nearly a decade of experience in infrastructure, networking, cybersecurity, and DevOps, where he focuses on building resilient systems that support modernization without sacrificing security or reliability. Logan is a cybersecurity engineer specializing in risk management and compliance with hands-on experience implementing the Navy's risk management framework, NIST 853, security controls, and DISA-STIG compliance. And Clint is a cybersecurity director at BlackRock Engineering and Technology and founder of STIG Solution, bringing more than 20 years of experience helping Department of Defense programs modernize while navigating RMF, NIST 853, and DISA-STIG compliance. Together, they are bringing years of experience supporting Department of Defense modernization efforts, cybersecurity, and mission-critical systems. I'm excited to hear their perspectives on what it takes to modernize successfully while keeping the mission running. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining me today. Let's dive right into today's topics. Carlos, let's start with the defense side of this. Unlike the commercial world, modernization really isn't optional anymore. From your perspective, why has modernization become such a priority across the Department of Defense?
Absolutely, it has become a priority. Modernization at this point, and we've been through it for decades now. The DOW and other spaces, we realized it's no longer nice to have. We are being driven not only by mission requirements but also by DoD requirements to implement zero trust initiatives, to deploy to production security. Legacy operating systems, they just won't cut it anymore. The risk that an end-of-life system can bring into a system is just nobody's willing to take that risk anymore. So the old approach where programs are willing to accept the risk of technical debt because the mission comes first, that is no longer going to be accepted, because we know that if systems are not secured, then you will be down in the future. Now it's a matter of when will you be down if your system is not secure, not if. So it is critical now to implement those type of security architectures like zero trust architectures where you trust nothing. You trust nothing from the outside. You trust nothing from the inside. You verify everything.
I think part of it too is it's regime change. Used to you'd have an old operating system or something, and they'd say, well, the options are shut it down or continue supporting the mission with this old, OS software, whatever it was, and that used to be acceptable, and it's just not anymore. I think my speculation is it's in part seen as motivation. We'll just shut you down until you can, get your act together and get updated. And in so many cases when I've seen it, it wasn't even, they shouldn't have ended up that way to begin with. but I think they kind of knew I'll go to the admiral and he'll say the mission's more important, and so they won't shut us down. And it's just not the case anymore. I think they will shut you down. And we've seen some instances where that's happened. And I think the thought process there is this will motivate people to stay up to date and to modernize. And then, like Carlos said too, just the requirements are changing. You've got threats like post-quantum encryption now, where everyone's really concerned about that. So they want to get to all the newer operating systems and newer software, to help mitigate that threat. It's not even a threat that's here yet. They just think it's something that they'll be able to do in the next 5 years, but you can already feel it. There's this push coming to get really up to date to cover those requirements as well.
Yeah, and I think the DoD, when you look at it, they've been trying to modernize across their systems as well as all of their supply chain, because they've realized that their issues are all spawning from just outdated systems in most cases. They have these systems that are on older legacy technologies or not using proper security measures because it was easier to implement at times. And so things got rushed through. And now they're in a state where they're like, wait, we need to fix this. And so they've been pushing modernization pretty hard and trying to streamline all of their systems across the board.
I think that's a great place to start, and it sets the stage for the next part of our conversation. Once organizations recognize the need to modernize, the challenge shifts from why to how. Clint, from your perspective, what are some of the hidden causes behind failed or disruptive upgrades?
Lack of planning, lack of infrastructure, and having a place, to roll these things out. Where they just don't create a huge burden on the system. I think about it's kind of like road construction. It'd be great to just shut the road down for 6 months, and just rip everything out and redo it all. And, it'd be so much easier, I'm sure, for those people working on that. But that's, you got to keep the road up and you got to keep the system going. So that really doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's a lot of extra work to come up with an elegant solution that doesn't create a lot of downtime, doesn't create a lot of pain for everyone. And people just don't want to burn those calories because it's harder. The less that you take away from system uptime, the more put into these upgrades. So it's painful. And the other part of that too is, let's say you're running, I don't know, what server 2019 on some servers right now, or RHEL 8, an upgrade's coming. And in this day and age, it could be coming sooner than what the vendor says the end of life date's going to be. We've seen that as well. And I think there's some other drivers that are going to drive that. It's coming, but you kick the can down the road, and then you get down to that point where you only got like 6 months left, and you think, oh, maybe I got enough time, but you still don't have a great solution, for handling these upgrades, and then you get time constrained, and then it just snowballs. Mm-hmm. And then you do end up with that downtime because you're like, well, we either go end of life, or I got to shut down the system and get all these upgrades done, or I got to create a huge maintenance window. So, I think that's why it happens is if organizations planned ahead and they chipped away at it and they built a long-term plan where they weren't trying to do everything last minute, and they built the infrastructure they needed to do these things elegantly, and the process and the know-how, it's also an important part, then these things wouldn't happen.
Right. And Logan, what's your take on this question? What are some of the hidden causes behind failed or disruptive upgrades?
Unrealistic deadlines often lead into it. Sometimes our requirements come from outside what our local teams want to do. Oftentimes it comes from government, customer requirements, just that sometimes feels like they're out of nowhere. You have to always make sure it's uptime, but like Clint said, sometimes there are a lot of different factors that make you have to do multiple different steps to upgrade. You could be running old OSs, old software. The software is compound on each other. The software might not run on the new OS. You have to upgrade the OS. Guess what? Whoever you're hosting the thing might not have support for it. There might not be proper security. It might not be approved. You got to go through a lot of things. Plus, operations has to spend time in testing that. You can't just deploy to a production system. You have to test it. And every time they're taken away from that, they're also having to do their daily task. They can't just stop what they're doing. They have to keep doing more and more and more. And no one wants to do it. No one has the bandwidth. And you just end up with delays and sometimes unmet expectations that you have to try to just limit as much as possible just to get it done and keep the mission going.
Thank you both. There are a lot of moving pieces involved, and every organization faces its own set of challenges. But regardless of the cause, the impact of downtime can be significant. Logan, do you feel downtime isn't just technical, but it's also operational and reputational?
Operational, definitely. It's kind of like I mentioned that it's not always just, it's like, oh, we can't do it. It's sometimes lack of planning. Management's got to come up with a plan for it. They have to be the ones that set aside the resources. There is always the top of the totem pole, sending the expectations down to the bottom. Mission always has to be online. A lot of our stuff is running for global operations. Anyone could be anywhere in the world. They could be over in Japan. They could be in the Middle East. They can be in Hawaii. They could be locally here. You can't just take it down to do stuff. You have to make sure that you have limited times to do it during certain weekends of maintenance, and those only come sometimes once a month. You might not be able to do that. It's normally just a scheduling. It's a money thing sometimes. It all costs extra to do it. So, and then for reputation, if you can't meet the expectations of the customer, they're going to replace you. That's a lot of jobs technically, because these projects could be massive. You could have a lot of people that you just you lose faith in the customer, you lose faith in the project, you lose faith in the team, and that affects a lot of people.
That's a great perspective, Logan. Thank you. Clint, I'd like to build on that for a moment because we've talked a lot about the risk of disruption. You've mentioned that organizations can't simply rip everything out and replace it overnight. Can you explain the difference between a big bang upgrade and continuously modernizing systems over time?
Yeah, well, one thing that I've seen where people get hung up is they go too long between these upgrades. A lot of these upgrades, some of them need to happen incrementally, so you can't go, can't go A to D. You got to go A, B, C, then D. So if you wait until F is out there and you have to go through all the increments, you just create a lot more work for it. It's kind of like you just let the work just pile up. Now you got to try to do it all at once. So that's no good. I always say it's just best to kind of stay in line and keep up to date incrementally in smaller steps. Even if you can go from A to F, sometimes it's just such a big change that there's things going on in the back end. There's so much change in just admin interfaces and like Logan mentioned, there's other components that have to come along with it and be upgraded. So when you have to take those bigger steps, it's just a lot more work. Whereas if you take the smaller steps, then it's not so bad. And a couple other things too. There's like a window in there with a lot of these upgrades, and you can be front leaning and more towards the front, or you can kind of hang onto the back and just kind of be drug along, so you can be further ahead or just kind of just ahead. And what we find in the federal space You've got all these requirements and updates and questions about what are you using this, or are you using that, if you upgraded it or not. If you tend to lag back towards the back where you're just barely ahead, what happens is you start getting caught up in all these, well, we need you to upgrade. We need to go ahead and upgrade this, earlier than maybe you would have normally had to. So that just puts you further behind, and you're getting these forced updates. Forced update is just more problems, because then you got everyone that gets in a hurry, and there's a lot of scrutiny, and there's even some wasted. There's a tax there with meetings, and I got to talk about it, and I got to report on it, and all this junk. And then if you're kind of forward leaning ahead, these things come down, and you're like, well, we already did that. So your response is, we already did that, go away, stop talking to me. And it's so much better, because then you plan ahead for your upgrade. I recently told a system that running server 2019, I said, you should go ahead and start talking about upgrading to 2025 now. And they were like, why? And I said, well, do you want 6 months to do the upgrade, or do you want 18 months? Because I think as we're sitting, you've got about 18 months. So you can start now and chip away at it for 18 months, or you can wait until you're told to do it, and then you get 6. And so when you talk about all these issues around upgrades and downtime and issues with things breaking and all of that, if I'm in a hurry, I'm going to have a lot more issues. If I'm chipping away at it, I'm not.
Right. And I think that's a helpful way to look at it. So let's take that one step further and talk about what that approach looks like in practice. Carlos, let's start with you. How would you break modernization into controlled, low-risk phases?
Yes, I believe that these things have to happen in parallel, right? Because as we mentioned at the top of the show, the mission is not going to go down. The mission cannot stop. Mm-hmm. So these efforts have to happen in parallel. And yes, it will require extra infrastructure from the get-go. It will require extra processes. But when you design the system with that in mind, with the fact that these are living systems that have components that not only have to be installed the first time, but also have to be updated, then you go in with that mind frame that, okay, this is not just a install it one time and then I'm done. You go in with the mind frame that I'm going to install this and I'm going to have to update this in a month or less. When you build that into the design of the system and you go about it like that, then you start to implement from the get-go the processes that are going to keep that system running long term, right? Another strategy is to build the system in a modular way, so that you're not tightly integrated into one specific vendor, for example. That way, and this can't always be accomplished, but if you're able to use multiple vendors that carry out the same thing, that can be loosely coupled together, so that if one part of that system becomes non-functional, then you can quickly replace it and you could get back into the mission. I think those are some ways that can facilitate this.
Thank you, Carlos. Ryder, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so from an operational perspective, and this is something that I'm working currently on one of my projects, right, is we have pieces that are on some older technology that we're trying to move forward on. And so what I've been pushing from my end is, okay, let's take this one piece at a time, rather than saying, okay, let's try to do everything at once in some big bang upgrade in a year when we don't really have a whole lot of time. Let's start pushing now, looking at, okay, we've got, a year or two until we need to start pushing these upgrades before it's a full requirement. Let's go and say we start testing this now while we have time, get this testing phase implemented, and then just start a slow rollout to your lower risk systems. These systems that, okay, if this one goes down, it's not catastrophic, right? You take this approach where you go and you kind of ease your way into it until you get to the point where all you have is your mission critical assets left, and then you say, okay, I have a plan. I've tested this across all my low risk assets, and go from there. And that way you've got a full strategy for getting to this modernized setup without causing downtime, or without causing major downtime, so that you're only within some kind of planned window. And then the other big piece there that a lot of people don't think about when doing stuff like this is that backout plan. And that, going back to that last question, tends to lead to a lot of the downtime that we see. Is you'll push this modernization effort without ever having your backout plan. Mm-hmm. So that's another really important piece of making this a low risk task, is along with all of the planning, the testing that you put in on the front end, you also need to make sure that you have a plan to get back to where you were in a functional state if this doesn't work the way you want it to.
Well said, thank you. Another important part of this conversation is security, something that touches every stage of modernization. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that next. Clint and Carlos, why do you see security as something that supports uptime rather than something separate from it?
I was going to let Carlos go first. It's not just security. These updates, typically they address issues. So it's not just getting caught out on something that from a security standpoint might shut you down, but you're also getting the updates that address issues. And once again, I see a time where see some resistance to an update, and then you look into it a bit more and you're like, well, if you guys would upgrade, you get this new D, it fixes these issues. Why do you there's just this resistance from a lot of admins to update because it's painful. It's like I'd say it's like cleaning out your garage. Like nobody wants to clean the garage because it's just like extra work. It's not super rewarding as an admin because you're not solving a problem. It's just work, or it doesn't feel like you're solving a problem, even though you do. So both from a security standpoint though, and just from a functionality standpoint, I think that's why it's important. And two, we say security isn't just keeping bad guys out. That is how it is depicted time and time again. That's how people frame that in their minds. They think the cybersecurity thing is just about keeping the bad guys out. Cybersecurity is about protecting the data, keeping the system up and working correctly. It becomes as a lot of things. You have your data good, just a lot of other aspects there beyond just keeping the bad guys out. So if you're following and meeting those requirements, some of those bad that aren't related to bad guys attacking you and where the system goes down, has an issue, there's a bug, whatever. If you just follow these requirements that say keep everything up to date, probably wouldn't have those problems, or at least you'd minimize them.
Carlos, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
That's exactly right. I'll go back to something Logan mentioned earlier about facing those impossible deadlines, right? Well, when you stay current, like Clint said, you don't see it right away, and engineers and system administrators don't see it right away. They just see it as initially more time that they need to spend in implementing security correctly. Well, when you implement it in the beginning and you set up that architecture correctly, the security architecture correctly from the beginning, you avoid those impossible deadlines down the road, right? But it is, I understand it is hard when it's hard to build things correctly and the right way from the beginning, right? Because you have deadlines all the time. You have deadlines in the beginning of a project, in the middle of a project, at the end of a project, and you just want to keep pushing that off. But if you take the time to design the system correctly, to design that security infrastructure correctly, like I mentioned before, not having a mindset, I'm going to build this, deploy it, and then I'm done, wipe my hands. No, you build it saying, I'm going to build this, I'm going to deploy it, and I need to continue upgrading and updating this so that it stays current. When you go in it with that type of mindset and your whole program has that same mindset and the same culture, then you will be successful.
And just to tack onto that too, right? Clint kind of mentioned it. A lot of times people think of I have to stop some external threat, right? From a security perspective. But
Right.
really, security comes down to three pieces, right? It's your CIA triad, your confidentiality, your integrity, and your availability. Uptime is all your availability. And there are updates that support your availability from there's a software bug that just causes this to crash at times. And so by just having these kind of security pieces built in, having your planned patching, having your newest updated OSs in place at times, like your newest stable OS releases, I'll say that kind of stuff can help with the availability to prevent these issues. And then outside of that, when you do look at it from the external threat actor perspective, right? If you don't have security built in, an external threat actor can take you down in 20 different ways. And so all of these pieces come together to help with that availability portion of security. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of organizations don't think about when it comes to security. They think of I got to make sure my data stays safe. They don't think about the security aspect of making sure it's always there and always available.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your insight. We've talked a lot about strategies that can help organizations modernize successfully. On the flip side, there are also some common pitfalls that teams run into along the way. Logan, where do teams go wrong and how can they course correct?
Like a planning often comes down to it. Kind of like I mentioned previously, there's a lot of like modernization stuff that has to be done and no one wants to do it, like cleaning out the garage, like Clint mentioned.
Yeah.
It's busy work. It's work that you don't want to do, but you got to do it. If you don't plan ahead, you'll fall behind, and then you got to answer why. They always want to know, why did you fail to meet these deadlines? And sometimes if you do not have a proper plan for it, you cannot answer those. And you look bad. You just look like you failed to meet expectations. You did not deliver on what you promised you would deliver. And it loses faith from the customer. Basically, you have to prove that you're competent and able to do your tasking for it. Management really needs to always have a plan for future upgrades, future tracking, and that plan has to be able to show that you are making efforts. You say you've got an upgrade that you need to do in a year, and you don't make it. They're going to ask why. Well, here's our list of upgrades that we had planned to do, and here's all the issues we ran into. These are why we failed. Suddenly, it's not, you failed to meet the deadline. It's, you ran into issues, and we see these are actually proper issues. We understand. It's more of it's a reasoning for why you failed, because not every time failing to meet expectations or deadlines is due to a common issue. It's normally sometimes due to factors outside of your control. Sometimes the vendor has bugs in their software. Sometimes there is stuff in your system that has conflicts with other stuff in your systems. And future planning, future testing, having multiple different inputs from multiple different team members that all have an area of expertise can really try to help limit issues and help you avoid common mistakes that you would make in the future.
Clint, is that something you've seen in your experience, and Can you tell me about how to prevent it?
Yeah, seen it a lot, and you got to plan. Like I said earlier, and try to take it in smaller chunks, just over and over and over again. And see that poor lack of planning. That's really what kills it, and it takes some leadership buy-in. That's the job of these project managers and scrum masters. We want to do all this tracking and Jira or whatever we're going to use and build out all these plans, but you see time and time again, that's where the failure is, because the plans don't get built out and they don't get followed. And leadership also lets the priorities shift. So something comes up, and the plan this week was to do that one little step that was going to lead us towards updating something. But something else came up, and we're now the priorities shift, and we threw out all that work and did this other thing. Well, now the next week I got to do what I was supposed to do last week and what I was supposed to do this week. If you broke that down into small enough chunks, you can survive some weeks like that. If you're trying to take big chunks, it's not going to work. And once again, that's why those trying to do upgrades really fast and in a short period of time doesn't work, because there's always competing priorities. And at least when you're taking small bites, you have an opportunity to make it up. But when you're trying to take big bites, you can't make it up. You either need more people or you need more time. And you usually don't have either. So
Yeah.
You gotta plan like really long-term, really small pieces, and you just can't. Leadership and the project managers can't let you fall too far behind on these things, or they won't get done, or they'll be a mess when you execute, because now you've got to take shortcuts and do them quickly.
And Clint, I mean, we've on some of our projects that we've worked on even seen where, we're getting this top level DoD, DOW requirements passed down for things like zero trust, right? But then the customer directly in charge of projects that we're on will try to make a priority elsewhere, that we're then stuck trying to manage. We're juggling expectations between, okay, well, so we've got this top level directive from the DoD that we have to meet this modernization effort in this timeline, and then we're competing with also our local management from the government end is like, wait, we don't want downtime on the system. What does this look like? But they don't have the budget for us to be able to stand up a secondary version of the system to be able to get the modernization efforts put in. So you've got that fun that you run into where even internally to the customers in a lot of these cases, we're fighting competing agendas, competing requirements and stuff.
Yeah, and then you give them the options. You can have this one or you can have that one, and they have to pick, and neither one of them is ideal. And they have to pick, because that's all you can do.
This has been a great discussion. Before we wrap up, I'd like to leave our listeners with one final takeaway. I'd love to hear from each of you. What defines a successful modernization effort? Carlos, I'd love to start with you.
Successful modernization. Well, in the DoD or DOW, a lot of times, one of the biggest success metrics would be no disruption to the mission, right? Mm-hmm. But that can't always be possible. You're going to be side-blinded in one or several projects, and you will have disruptions. I believe another success metric can be learning from mistakes, implementing lessons learned into your next project. And not only that, if you don't want disruptions, then you start from the get-go with implementing the correct architecture and correct security architecture, taking security seriously from the beginning, implementing those those side platforms that are able to that allow you to modernize at the same time that your mission is going. You implement that from the beginning, and you know, even if there are disruptions, you will recover from those disruptions quickly.
Logan?
Yeah, sometimes I think the best way to show success isn't always the most visible ways. You can sometimes have success by showing that you might have not met expectations last time, but you could take lessons learned from that. The best way to have success sometimes for it is to learn from any mistakes and be able to fix it in the future, because mistakes do happen sometimes. Deadlines don't get met, issues happen. Limiting those and learning from them in the future so that next time or any other time in the future, it doesn't happen again. And having proper teams that know what they're doing for stuff like that will make it so that next time around, you might not have anything. And guess what? Now that team has all that experience, so more than likely you won't have any more issues again, except for factors outside of your control. The best way you can upgrade something is if you meet the deadlines and there is no outside evidence that you actually had to make the change. There's no downtime. There's no interruptions. There's no lack of support. There's no lack of features. And if anything, you should be improving on features. You always want to add to it. You don't want to remove, meet the deadline, and show that you're always learning and planning ahead.
Ryder, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, so I think a successful modernization effort, really, the only way you're going to truly have a successful modernization effort, in my opinion, is if you do have the groundwork planning in place, because you don't even know what success looks like if it's not planned, right? So it all comes back to the planning phase, and if that planning phase is done right, you can push forward on your implementation, and you know exactly what it's supposed to look like. You have clear expectations set, you have a goal in mind, and so it really looks like a very planned, well thought out approach. I think anything that's not planned and well thought out isn't really something that I could consider successful, even if it works the way that you want it to, and you manage to get everything fully functional. It's really not a success if you haven't planned it, because you don't know what success is supposed to be. You've got something that works, but that's not success. I think success is really you are accomplishing what you set out to with a clearly defined perspective.
Thank you. And Clint, last but not least, what's your perspective on this?
I'm going to quote the A-Team's John Hannibal Smith for an 80s reference. I love it when a plan comes together. There's this idea of hero hours, and things get behind, we got to get it done. It's like, hey, I stayed up all night to get, we got this done. Bravo Zulu, everybody, well done. Well done. We did a crummy job planning all this out, and we executed poorly, and everybody had to do all these hero hours, and okay, we got it done. It's probably pretty messy. And two, maybe the upgrade wasn't even that good. I mean, there's different definitions of done, right? So just because you got it upgraded doesn't necessarily mean you did it well. And maybe some back end things, you took some shortcuts or whatever to create issues for you down the road. So to me, if you have a good plan and you execute well, that's a good measure of success, because anything else is just messy.
Thank you all for sharing your perspectives today. There's been a lot of great insights throughout this conversation, and I think one theme that kept coming up again and again is that successful modernization starts with thoughtful planning. And if there's one thing to take away from today, it's this. Modernization doesn't have to come at the expense of mission readiness. When it's done right through thoughtful planning, collaboration, and a phased approach, systems don't stop, they evolve. And that shift from fearing downtime, designing for continuity, is what allows organizations to actually move forward with confidence. Thank you all again to Clint, Carlos, Logan, and Ryder for the conversation, and a big thank you to our listeners for joining us on the LoJo Show. Don't forget, here at BlackRock, we fix cyber. We'll continue bringing conversations that help leaders navigate the world of federal contracting and, of course, cybersecurity with clarity and confidence.